Hi everyone, my name's Rob Whitehouse. I appreciate it might be the middle of the day for you, but it's about 7 o'clock at night for me here, so the light level's not particularly good, so apologies for the picture. But hopefully you can see my screen nice and clearly anyway. And I'm here to give you a short talk on food waste. Sorry I can't be there today. We couldn't find a volunteer who was available, one of our waste savvy staff's volunteers, to do the talk for you. So you'll have to put up with me, I'm afraid. 15 minutes isn't very long, so if you're interested in this in any more detail, or composting or recycling, anything to do with waste reduction, do get in touch. You can get my email from Pam or from my volunteer Claire, who's also there on the plastic-free buying stand as well. So fighting food waste is what we're going to call this short little talk. To give you a bit of background, Staffordshire disposed of about 419,000 tonnes of household waste last year, and 53% of that was recycled, composted or reused. Now, the stuff that wasn't recycled, reused or composted, just so you know, doesn't go to landfill in Staffordshire. Only 1.27% goes to landfill. Most of it goes, well, the rest of it goes to an energy recovery facility, which is where it's burned at high temperatures to create electricity. Now, it's very easy to think that that's a clever system and that we don't need to worry about doing any recycling and reusing and reducing, and to just throw everything into energy recovery. But it isn't the best way of making renewable electricity by any means, is it? And it's not better than recycling or reusing, and especially not better than reducing in the first place. It's just better than landfill is the only thing we can say, really. So we're looking at the reduce topic. Now, to understand that a bit better, it's helpful to look at what's inside the average bin. And this comes from a waste composition analysis, which is a study taken from samples from bins. And you can see that the food waste takes up about 29% of the average bin, not everybody's, but the average bin. And stuff that could have been recycled, about 25%, and 10% textiles. And that just shows that what a high proportion food waste has in the bin. And that's in an area where there are some districts that collect food waste. It just goes to show that a food waste collection doesn't stop food waste going into the residual waste bin. So it's really important to reduce it. So what can we do to make that change? Well, the waste hierarchy is the way to look at it, and reduce is at the top. If you're interested in the rest of it, obviously you can get a talk from us for a group, school, scouts, guides, college, university, you name it. Come to me and I can arrange a talk for you. So let's look at reduce. And when we talk about reducing, we're talking about food waste. It is the most important thing. And the reason for that is because we waste a third of all of the food produced, and like nearly 70% of that comes from households. It doesn't come from supermarkets and left in farmers' fields and wasted from restaurants, although obviously there is some wastage in all of those areas, but the bulk of it is from households. And that's like 7 million tonnes a year, which would fill Wembley Stadium 9 times over. Now, in Food Waste Action Week, RAP had some nice statistics about food waste and linking it to climate change, which I think is a good idea. They showed that 81% of people in the UK were concerned about climate change, not surprising, but only 37% of those thought food waste contributed to climate change, which I think was quite a surprising statistic. If food waste was a country, it would have the third biggest carbon footprint after the USA and China. 30% of our global greenhouse gases come from producing food, so we can't afford to waste it. Wasted food accounts for more global greenhouse gas emissions than flying. If we all stop wasting bread in the UK for a year, it could do the same for emissions as planting 5 million trees. And equally, if we stopped wasting those 710,000 tonnes of potatoes we do every year, it could also be the equivalent of planting 5 million trees. A nice comparison there when we consider that tree planting is, where a lot of efforts are being put at the moment to offset greenhouse gas emissions. But actually stopping food waste does the job without worrying about doing any of those things. It can also save the family money, but the money angle hasn't really had the impact that Love Food Hate Waste would have liked over the years. It's made some. I'm hoping that maybe the environmental angle might wake people up a little bit more. Apparently the 18 to 35 group is the group that wastes the most. But there's not much in it, to be honest, before you start starting on the younger generation. When you look at some of the data sets, it's pretty even across the board. There's always reasons why different people at different times in their life waste food. Just a rough idea of some of the huge amounts of food waste that gets thrown away: 4 million whole potatoes, 2 million slices of ham, 1 million whole bananas, 3 million glasses of milk. That's every day in the UK. And worst of all, bread. 20 million slices of bread go to waste every single day. And of course, that could have been easily frozen. And lots of other little tips about making breadcrumbs. You could turn the ends of loaves into little mini pizzas for the kids. Lots of easy, simple ways to save bread. Now, there's lots of tips, and one of my full food waste talks, or one of my volunteers talks, I should say, as well, would go through all of those. Haven't got time for those, so it's just an overview today. But we would talk about things like planning rather than just making it up as you go along when you go shopping, understanding the differences between dates. People are still confused about, sort of like the sell bys and display untils are for shops, but then best before is is one where you could eat it a little bit after, but it might not taste as good. And then use by is the only one that's like a food standards thing. I'll come back to that in a second. Using up leftovers. I'll also mention that in a moment. Being careful about how much you cook. Which, once again, guessing doesn't help when you're making things like pasta and rice. They swell in the pan. You end up having too much, and it ends up being thrown away. Understanding your fridge and your freezer. I'm going to mention that in a moment. And sharing food as well, whether through a community fridge or through other means, and I'll mention one of those. And then composting as well, of course, is a great way of saving food waste. All of these in a little bit of a way I'm going to mention in some of my top tips. So here's some top tips. A couple of app ones I like to get in there because the younger generation, apparently 18 to 35s are the big target, and they're much more smartphone app savvy. I think Yumly is one of the best apps for saving food, but it isn't a food waste app. Nobody designed it with that in mind. But here's why I think it's particularly effective. Well, for a start, from a recipe point of view, it searches the entire internet. It's not like BBC Good Food where you've just got a few recipes from users. And the Love Food Hate Waste website has recipes, but only a few. Yumly searches across the internet. Now, this is particularly useful when you come to things like using leftovers. Because if you've got a bit of chicken, a courgette, and some coriander left over from a meal that you made earlier, then to find a recipe that works with that, you'd either have to search through a lot of cookery books if you didn't know how to make something up yourself, I'm saying, for example. But if you just type in those items into the Yumly app, it will show you. I think that the example I gave in one of my slides was something like about 200,000 recipes come up with those ingredients in. So that gives you an idea of the sheer volume of recipes it's searching. It's also useful because it creates an automatic shopping list. So when you go shopping, actually before you go shopping, you can look at that list and you can tick things to take them off the list because you've already got them in the house. So that stops duplication. So really, really useful from all sorts of different angles. And it's just got some really good recipes on there as well. The best before date thing and the use by date, I want to just briefly mention that, largely because there's some move to take items that were used by because they were considered to be a danger to eat them after that date, to change them to best before, to get people thinking about they should be checking it more carefully. So like fruit juices and soft cheeses, you'll start to see having best before instead of used by. And I think this is a really nice nudge behaviour thing that the government are pushing for, and they're trying to get more food producers to change their labelling. I think that could be really interesting going forward. Fridges is another area that WRAP are focusing on, and they did a study to see what the average fridge temperature was, which really surprisingly was 7 degrees. And considering that 0 to 5 degrees is the optimum fridge temperature, that is quite concerning, and possibly why a lot of food like milk especially is going off so quickly. The fridge getting warm is a big factor as well, so don't leave the door open and avoid putting warm food in. And don't put milk in the door, which is the warmest part of the fridge, or the least cool part of the fridge, I should say. Keep it in the heart of the fridge in the centre. The freezer, The most important thing you can do with the freezer is keep away air and moisture, obviously, and the same for the fridge. So keep them in some boxes, but also remember to label them. Most food thrown away from the freezer was because people didn't know what it was anymore when they'd frozen it. So labels, really important. And freezing meals in small portions, they freeze faster, they defrost quicker. And things like, we've mentioned bread already, can freeze really well. Milk, though, as well, although it expands a little bit in the bottle, so allow a bit of space. And even grated cheese works well, and herbs, they all freeze fine. I just want to mention one more app on that front is the Olio app, which is just a way of freely sharing food with your neighbours. And I think this could really, really be revolutionary in terms of food waste. They've already got, I think, over 1 million users now. What I would say, though, I've been talking about Olio pretty much ever since it came out, is a lot of people try it and then realise they haven't got many people nearby, and so they uninstall it. What I'd like to try and say to people and challenge people is maybe to try and encourage people around you to create a food sharing network. It's so easy to do, and it just means that if you're going away on holiday, for example, you could just photograph those 4 or 5 things that you know you won't get a chance to eat, and somebody else could swoop in and say, yeah, I'll have that off you, and they could just pick it up from your door. You don't have to talk to people if you don't want to. You can just leave it in your porch or something like that. I think that is a fantastic idea. I'm going to briefly mention composting because it's one of the top ways really to reduce food waste. If you want to talk from us, do get in touch, or you can go on to the charity that I work for, Garden Organic. We have a composting section on there. But mainly we're just talking about organic matter, so fruit, vegetables, grass, leaves, twigs, that breaks down in the presence of air. Why should we compost? Well, obviously it helps your garden to grow, but it also stops us from using peat compost. Peat bogs, we should leave those well alone. They're a carbon sink, and a very important ecosystem for all sorts of creatures. It reduces emissions so that you don't have trucks going around picking up waste so much. There's less waste to collect. It also stores carbon in the soil. So compost holds onto a bit of carbon, but also when you transfer it to your soil, it enables the soil to hold more carbon as well. So there are lots and lots of reasons why it's really important. And it's cheaper as well. Cheaper for you because you don't have to buy lots of products and bags of compost and fertilizers, because compost does a lot of that stuff for you. And it's cheaper for your council as well. Less residual waste to throw away, which obviously would benefit the taxpayer in the long run. We like composting because it's a closed loop cycle. And you're the waste producer, you're also the waste processor, and you also use the product in your garden. Now, there's some simple things you can do to make sure you get the most out of composting. The first one I'm going to talk about in the shortened version here, we talk about this longer in our composting talk, is getting the mix right, what you feed your bin. And it's important to get that 50-50, roughly 50-50 mix of greens and browns. The greens are high in nitrogen and moisture, and they rot down very quickly. And the browns are high in carbon, and they take longer to break down. And that's important because it adds a bit of, they add a bit of structure to the bin. They create airflow, pockets of air, and that's how you get heat. And that's how you make your compost break down quicker. Another thing people can get wrong is where they put their bin. Now, the position of the bin in terms of it being on bare earth, now, of course, that is the best place to go because all the decomposers can get in there easily. But if you put your bin on slabs, on concrete slabs, it would work. It would just take longer for it to happen. So don't despair if you haven't got any grass or bare soil. You can put it on slabs. But one thing not to avoid is the amount of sun you can get. Now, it doesn't want to be in full sun, but you don't want it in full shade either. It needs some sun to work, so don't hide your bin away. Choosing a bin can be a bit overwhelming. I haven't got time to go into all the bins here, but I would recommend a beginner to get started with a nice, simple black wall compost converter, a Dalek bin as it's otherwise known, which is the one in the top middle there. You can buy any type of bin though from getcomposting.com. If you type in your postcode on getcomposting.com, it shows you the offers in your area. And for Staffordshire, that is the very bargain price of £10 for a 220 litre and £12.50 for a 330 litre. So a really, really good price. In a nutshell, that was a little bit about food waste. I want to bring you back to the waste hierarchy briefly, just to say that at the bottom of it, we have landfill, and right at the very top is reduce, and reducing food waste is the very, very best we can do. One last word on Waste Savvy Staffs. It's a council-funded campaign to reduce household waste. And my charity, Garden Organic, has been contracted to deliver that campaign in terms of the volunteers going out and spreading the word. What other things can we do? Well, obviously, a bit like this, we can do talks, usually in person, obviously, but it works. We do stands at public events. Claire is one of my volunteers, but she's got a stand of her own as well, but you can pop in and see her if you'd like a leaflet. Our volunteers will also just have informal chats with neighbours and things like that. We do schools, scouts, guides, any group at all that's willing to have a talk from us, and we can try and support people to reduce waste a bit more. If you think you could be a Waste Savvy Staffs volunteers and help your community to reduce waste, please do get in touch at rwhites@gardenorganic.org.uk. That's it for now. Have a great day, and thanks for listening.